Okay, now in this video we're going to talk about the meat of your acceptance speech, your thank you talk. And this is what people remember. Everything we've done up until this point in time, the first 30 seconds, was just to let the audience know we care, we're proud, we're thankful. You can do that so very quickly. And your goal is to get into the next two parts of the program, which include talking about your history or your future with this organization and telling stories, whether they're funny or inspirational. This is what people remember. And what's so great about the whole storytelling and the history aspect, these are things you don't have to write down. You can remember these from just, I want to tell this story. Well, tell that story. And tell it in a way that's moving or inspirational or funny, whatever the case is. But you can remember stories without having to write them down. So let's look at least two stories initially, and we'll evaluate those, and we'll break them down, and I'm going to show you some of the things that you can do to make for a great story. Well, let's take a look at them.
Folks, it's been a ride. It's been unbelievable. We did not make it easy for the Postal Service to award this contract to us. Sherry Coates is over there laughing. Sherry Coates, or someone at procurement, called and they said, as we were going through the procedures, let me make sure I understand this. We are about to award the single largest customer service training contract in the history of the world, and you're telling me, Bob, that your company has a net worth of $110? And I said, is there a problem with that? Well, nonetheless.
Okay, let me stop there. Now, this particular story is a very self-effacing story. I have a chance to tell the story about someone in the audience who gave us the award. And by the way, most of the time when you tell a story, you want to try to tell a story about someone who is in the audience, if at all possible. In this case, Sherry Coates, or as I mentioned, someone in the procurement office. And it may very well have been someone in the procurement office, but the goal was to call out Sherry Coates, to call out one of our customers, and to have her be the good guy, a person doing due diligence. And me telling a story about that our company's only worth $110, for goodness sakes, when we're going to do the largest customer service program in the country, it's just self-effacing. It's a simple story that calls somebody out. Now, can you do the same? Can you think of a situation where someone who's in that audience, someone who's responsible for giving you the award, or at least represent that organization, has done something correctly? This is not the place to embarrass that person, but where they've done their job and you've looked silly. Just tell the story. You notice this story took 30 seconds to tell, and it's funny and it's humorous and it's blah, blah, blah. Well, let's go on and look at another story, and let's see how it applies.
You all showed a tremendous amount of faith in us, and we really, really, really appreciate that. Folks, we have had such a wonderful time. Our partnership with the Postal Service has grown so strong, and it's grown so powerful, that our children even believe that we are now employed by the United States Postal Service. And I remember my younger son about 2 years ago said, "Dad, who do you work for really?" You know, he said, "You work for the Postal Service." And I said, "Why would you think that we're employed by the Postal Service?" He said, "Well, there's really three things, Dad, that lead me to believe that." I said, "What are they?" He said, "You're starting to talk and use terms that nobody else understands." One. He said, "Secondly, every single piece of clothing I have has USPS written somewhere on it." And he said, "Finally, every 2 weeks you get a check in the mail from the Postal Service. That's the happiest I ever see you and Mom." I said, "You know, I guess in reality we do."
Okay, now this is one of the simplest forms of storytelling. And you find something and you tell it in threes. In this case, you know, our children think we work for the Postal Service. You know, for this reason, and this reason. And you always try to make the third one the most bizarre, the funniest, or the most interesting. Like, for example, my grass is always green because I fertilize it, I over-fertilize it, and then I paint it. Well, there. Those are three things. It's kind of funny. And think about how you can use 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, bang. 1, 2, bang. With the organization giving you the award. For example, I was compelled to join your organization because, first of all, it was made up of a great group of people. Secondly, there was so much learning going on, I had to be a part of it. And finally, you had kidnapped my daughter. I don't know, I might say that if my daughter was well known in that organization and she was the reason that I joined. You know, just think in terms of 1, 2, 3. How can you tell a story like that? It always gets a laugh, and it's something that is so very easy to do. Don't do it with 2 things. Don't do it with 4 things. It's known as the rule of 3. Now I'm going to jump ahead here in the video, and let's go on to some other forms of storytelling, and I'll show you how that works. Okay, let's take a look at the setup for 2 more stories. And these are just anecdotes that happened that I'd heard about, and they're entertaining. But notice how they have to do with the Postal Service, with what the Postal Service is doing to succeed, what someone in the Postal Service did that was funny, what someone in the Postal Service did that was creative. And this is what you want to do with the organization that gave you the award. What did someone in this organization do that was funny, that was inspiring, that moved you somehow, some way? Well, let's just watch these little stories, and we'll take a look at it from there.
Folks, I need to tell you, what we discovered was not what we expected. We discovered 100,000 retail employees that cared. I mean, that cared so much to do the right thing. And we found that there are service providers within the Postal Service that truly serve people from the heart. We found that there are people that have a great sense of humor in the Postal Service and people that use a tremendous amount of common sense to serve every one of us, our customers.
All right, I'm going to stop right there and tell you this was the setup. Now, I had the stories in mind, and one is, well, they're both kind of funny, and they both have to do with common sense, and they both have to do with being humorous or having a good sense of humor. Now, I knew that's what these stories were about, so prior to telling both of those stories, I gave the people in the Postal Service credit for being humorous, having a great sense of humor, and having a lot of common sense. So when you think of your stories, then go back and think of how you can praise this organization or the people in the organization for the characteristics that these stories are going to show. It's to some extent some form of foreshadowing, I guess. So you notice the setup is they have a great sense of humor and they have a lot of common sense. So let's listen to the stories.
We've learned some interesting things about some of the districts we've been to as well. I'll just use Greater Michigan District as an example because this is in fact where this happened. We had a clerk was telling us about a customer that came running into the post office, pushed all the other customers out of the way, slapped an envelope on the counter, and he said, "Look, I don't care how much this costs, I don't care what it takes. I want this in Las Vegas and I want it there tonight." The window clerk looked up, he said, "Yes, sir, that'll be $700 and I'm leaving right now."
Okay, all right, let me just stop there. That's a good story. I didn't tell it well, but that's a good story. It's something funny that happened that these folks had never heard of, that they were proud of, that somebody that represents them said something funny. Now think about that. It's a form of likability. We like people, and I didn't tell you this earlier, but we like people who we associate with good feelings. If you're going to tell me somebody that I'm associated with did something wonderful and good and funny, it makes me feel wonderful and good and funny. So in this particular case, even though I would have told that story with a little more expressiveness, the point is that I'm sharing something humorous that somebody else did that represents people in the room. Well, let's go on and look at the next story and see how it's a little different and how it's similar.
One of the big issues, I'm going to get off here in a minute, I promise. One of the big issues, as y'all know, is moving the line in the retail lobbies. That's been a big deal. Some people struggle with it. Some people do a great job. Others, for example, a window clerk in Key West, Florida, used a great sense of humor with it. She had, and I want you to imagine this, 20, 30, maybe 40 people standing in line, all frustrated. And she was obviously, her heart was bleeding for these people. She wanted so badly to help them, and she has a wonderful sense of humor. She looked out over the audience of these people waiting in line, weaving back and forth throughout the Postal Service, and she said, hey, can I have y'all's attention? And they all looked up. She said, how many of y'all would like to stand in a shorter line? They all raised their hand. She said, then move closer together. All right.
Okay, I don't know why I think that is so funny. I always have. And I heard that story, years ago when it happened. But I'll tell you something. I had told that story 2 or 3 other times prior to telling it here at this awards banquet. And the other 2 times I told it, it didn't really get a laugh. And they were postal audiences, but not this big postal audience. And it struck me, it struck me a little odd that the people didn't laugh. And I realized that I didn't set the story up properly. I just told a story about a retail clerk in Florida that said move closer together. Well, what happened was, because I didn't set it up right, the folks thought that was kind of an offensive thing to do. They felt like, well, that was kind of a rude thing to do. Maybe she thought it was funny, but it wasn't really funny. So what I did here is I set it up in such a way that said, there are people that have a great sense of humor. Here's a woman that was so compassionate. She felt for these people. She knew they were frustrated. So she tried to lighten up the environment a little, and I think she did a great job. Now, by setting it up that way, people understand where she was coming from. Now, all of a sudden, it's funny. It represents them in lieu of, can you believe she would do that? So when you tell stories, they don't all have to be funny. Please, they do not have to be funny. But what they have to be is they have to be told about someone that was responsible for giving you that award. If you can bring out their names, great. It has to have something to do with that organization. It has to have something to do with making the people in that room feel good about the story you're telling. Under no circumstances do you want to embarrass anybody in any of your stories. And notice these little stories I'm telling. They go from 15 seconds to as long as, I don't know, 30 seconds. That's it. And so far you just saw 4 cute little quips. Now, you can come up with 4 cute little quips very easily. And this is a big part of what I'm going to have you do as we get into the writing the story thing. And I'm going to give you some other ways of looking at it. But these are the things I want you to keep in mind right here. Talk about the history, and in my case, everything I shared here was history, and tell a funny or inspiring story. Now, the only thing that's different here is if we were moving forward with the Postal Service and continuing to do programs, etc., I would talk about the future. I would talk about what we've learned and how it's inspired us together to work together to do these amazing things. How together the United States Postal Service and Sommers Communication can change the world, can change the way everyone sees service in the Postal Service. You know, and I would make it inspiring, and I might even provide a call to action, which is a challenge to the audience. And it would be, you know, dear Postal Service audience members, I challenge you to this. I challenge you to do everything in your power to blah, blah, blah. Because we're going to be doing, I challenge ourselves to blah, blah, blah. You know, and again, when you've been elected to do something in the future, you want to use that call to action. You want to use that inspiration, and you want to be able to move people in that manner. All right, so there we have it. When we get to our next video, I'm going to take a look at how you acknowledge the people that gave you the award, and we're also going to talk about getting off the stage and why it's important. So I'll see you on the next video, and hope you have your pencil and paper in hand making notes, because this is the essence of your wonderful, fabulous, and creative thank you talk or your acceptance speech. See you in the next video.